Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Super excited. We have made it to August and we are continuing kind of a fun series of conversations. This one today, I'm really excited about. We're going to dig into artificial intelligence. We're going to dig into some applications of artificial intelligence. And maybe most importantly for engineers and the people listening here is how is that going to affect you? Which I think is a really interesting style of conversation that I don't hear nearly enough people talking about. Uh, I do want to say if you guys are new here, welcome. If you guys have been here before, welcome back. If you're new here, we do our very best to have fun, interesting manufacturing, industrial related conversations just about every Wednesday. The next 2 weeks will be slightly off for a couple of reasons, but we'll tell you guys about that at the end. And this week we're talking again all about artificial intelligence. If you guys have questions or comments, especially for our LinkedIn and our YouTube listeners, please go ahead and drop those in the chat. Vlad and I will be monitoring the chat as we always do, and we'll do our very best to go get a couple of those questions in, especially if you guys can get questions in edgewise between Vlad and I, who are both very excited for this conversation today. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Umaira Malik from Canvas AI. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Dave. Very excited to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation for which Dave made a little intro. That being said, Humera, before we dive into that, could you give us a little bit more information about your background? How did you get into manufacturing, AI, and ultimately what you are doing today?
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief for the journey part. So the journey got me started as an engineer from working in the telecom sector, which is all about connectivity, into the IoT sector, which further came about connecting all devices. From the IoT, I landed into the industrial IoT side. And it was really through the path of working with different enterprises that I was working with to help them start to collect data. And then it got from collecting to hoarding of the data, which is everybody loves to do that. They were spending, like the customers I was working with were spending millions and hundreds and millions of dollars to actually connect and make their physical assets into virtual assets and start collecting data. And then I got a chance to start working with some of the industrial customers who I saw were very good at that, and especially at hoarding part of the data. Because when we would be called in to come in and connect another system so they could collect their data, only to realize that the last time when we did it, everybody's still figuring out what to do with it. And so, being a problem solver, I kind of thought, okay, there's something that's not connecting here. Is like, they have all of this data, but they're not doing anything with it. And when I say I'm really talking about from a manufacturing industrial perspective, right? This is where you've gone through with so much of an investment and the barrier of IT as well to bring in that data and start to collect it all the way from SCADA systems to historians to other systems where you're collecting it, but what to do with it outside of just looking at some charts and that's it. So being a problem solver, that's kind of what led me to it. I didn't know necessarily that I would land with Canvas, but it was really the problem solving approach that I was trying to apply. And I partnered with some really smart folks. They were basically coming in what you would call as data scientists today, but really they were kind of the people that knew how to work with data. And then quickly realized that there was a lot of value in that data that could be driven. That's what led me to get into where I am today. But it was really all about, hey, I'm seeing this problem. Lots of data is there. So data rich, information poor, as you would say, is really what I saw. And I was trying to connect the dots to get to that point of how do you drive value. And as I'll tell you more about what we are doing, it's about connecting people with their data, removing the barriers of how people can interact and drive value from that data, and then taking it to a point of throughout their workflow of decision making and optimization of that process is what I got into doing for the industrial sector. I would point out, Vlad, is AI is not necessarily something that we started doing yesterday because of the hype. We have been actually one of the pioneers to bring AI into the industrial sector. So we have fought the battle to the uphill battle of how you bring in AI, but we saw AI as the need and the necessity because of, you're dealing with large volume and different frequencies and velocities of data. That's what the need was. It wasn't necessarily it's a technology that's being brought in just for the sake of it. It was really the need for this sector where AI comes in and plays a role.
Let me ask you. I guess I have a few follow ups, but I think you've mentioned earlier in your career you were in the IoT space, which my understanding is quite a bit different than IIoT or the industrial Internet of Things space. At least having been on the OT side for so long, I know that there's unique challenges, but I'm curious, maybe on your perspectives when it comes to like, are those data challenges maybe solved in a certain way or in a better way than industrial, and then we can benefit from bringing them to the industrial space, or are they, I guess, so different maybe that we require a different approach in the industrial space? I'm curious what your perspective was, making that shift.
The basics of it are pretty much the same. The basics about providing the basic infrastructure for connectivity, the basics of it providing the necessary software and hardware to bring about that connection is the same. The difference that you would see between the industrial side and the other side is really all about the safety and the security of that data and how and you can make it available for the use of it. Because if you look at the IoT side and then coming into the industrial IoT side, a lot of that data, the common factor is also about the data where it sits, and cloud becomes a very important component of it. So the hardware side, every industry, everybody, they have their own ways and their own specs and different providers, but the common elements is what I'm talking about. So if you look at that, then you're dealing with a different kind of an environment when it comes to industrial IoT because of the risk with that data of putting it in the cloud. So it has been and continues to be a barrier in certain places. Obviously, we have come far in the last decade or so in trying to work that problem. But that was the major, I would see, the shift, the problem that I see or the challenge that I encountered between the two sides. Then, it's also about the cost and how you're operationalizing. Those are other things, but I think that's the basic fundamental issue or the challenge that I saw between the two sides. And that's what we're still working in this industry. Some have overcome that. Some are still in the early stages. And due to that, like companies like us, companies like Canvas, we also had to build a business model around our technology that basically could work with it, where how much of that information, where there is a need and necessity for it in the cloud, and what is it that needs to then go off on on-premise basis as well. So what kind of that hybrid model that can be created, that's what we ended up doing as we started to implement these and operationalize these in industrial environments.
Gotcha. And I guess as a follow up on that, right, like maybe digging a little bit more into Canvas AI and maybe the spark that started the company, I'm curious, because I think there's many layers to data, right? There's obviously like extracting data, there's processing data, there's analyzing data, then there's making decisions. Maybe what was I want to say, the biggest pain point that you guys saw initially when it comes to the industrial space that sort of started the company, right? Because you've mentioned you have now a deep understanding and application of AI, but maybe that was not the first thing that came initially to mind.
Yeah, nobody comes to us and says at that time, and nobody comes to you and says, I want to implement AI. Now it's a very different landscape, and not just industrial, otherwise as well, right? Oh, how do I implement AI and how do I implement certain kind of tools associated with AI? At that time, it was really about the place where it got started was, hey, I've invested a lot in my data infrastructure. I am sitting on a wealth of data, I believe. And I'm looking to basically make use of that in a certain place. So for example, it was really in a place where the customer had worked with a couple of our partners, and including actually, they were a big partner of Microsoft as well. And they had basically made use of the data lake to bring in a lot of their data. And what they were next looking to do is how to make use of it. And one place to get started, usually, this is kind of the norm even at that time, was one place to get started is really looking at where do I have data and where do I have a problem? If I can match those two, it's a place for me to get started. So that was the match where they got started looking at their data. And really the place where they got started was looking to optimize a 40-year-old process that has been running that way forever. So fermentation process. So you look at a fermentation process, has been in this industry. If you go into chemical plants and other places, it's been running a certain way forever. It's a batch process. I know as an engineer, I've been working it for the past 40 years. It's always run this way. But the problem is that your assets get deteriorated over the course of time. And now you want to also look at is how do I optimize the lifespan of these assets while making sure that my product stability, quality, everything remains the same. So it really comes in from the place of, I have a lot of data. I think I can optimize this process. I just don't know how I can optimize it. The first challenge that you have to overcome, it's not the data challenge. It's the mental challenge of change. Okay, what is the change that you're looking for? What is the change that you're looking to implement? It's not about AI, it's about that. And from that, what you actually learn is the change is really, I'm looking for a consistency in my product line while making sure that I can optimize the lifespan of my assets. And so this is really the starting point. That gave us the starting point for building what Canvas is today. And then from there on, really, it was about, okay, I see this can augment, I'm running these first principles based model, I've always run them, but now you've given me something which has further augmented my process, not necessarily replaced it, not necessarily thrown everything out. The learning is being utilized. And that's very important. I'm saying these things now, it's very easier to say. We didn't know all this at that time. What we learned through that process of engagement was what was important is it's not a replacement, it's actually augmentation. It's something that's going to augment my team to be better at it, because we, as we'll mention throughout this conversation, there's really a lack of experienced resources now because there is a huge aging workforce as well. So realizing all of that, that's what they were looking to implement, is how do I optimize a fermentation process? What they ended up using AI for is really evaluation of a very dynamic process to basically predict when a certain quality during that fermentation process runs out, so I can turn off that batch. I've always run it for 80 hours. Can I run it for 72 hours? Those 8 hours, I can use it towards the next batch, and my assets are optimized now, right? And that was really the thought process, which they implemented. AI became a key tool, and then we never looked back. We kind of went forward with it, looking at, okay, this is kind of the niche that it can bring. This is the value it brings. We've just continued to refine that process of engagement with our customers.
Let me ask you, I guess, one last follow-up before I pass it on to Dave. And I think, to some extent, maybe it is the unfortunate maybe reality of our industry in the fact that, nobody really says which state they're in, for a number of reasons. You don't want to really disclose what your factory is utilizing or which state it is in. But I can tell you from personal experience, right, there's going to be a lot of factories in the, let's call it whiteboard or even paper-based state where they've not even started collecting the data. They don't fully understand what it can be used for, and they don't even have maybe the infrastructure to start building out some of these building blocks, right? So I'm curious, maybe what do you see in the industry, what the appetite for these types of solution looks like? Because I certainly, I've worked on data, so I see the opportunity, but I think not everyone can fully understand what the transformations even look like, what the opportunities are like, and I'm just curious what you have seen in your experience.
Well, I'm glad you asked this question, because it's one of my, I would say this is one of the things that I would say everybody needs to know, is because whoever comes to looking at this problem, they always come with, I have lots of data. And then you find out, yeah, it's lots of data. Somebody's head, sometimes on these boards, on paper sheets. It's a lot of data. So I think that assumption I've seen majority of the people walk in with. But I would say is something that we have learned with our customers is they end up spending a lot of cycles in that process of data discovery. Do I have the data or not? Does it really comply with what I'm trying to do or not? Okay, then how do I access it? So those kind of things, we have been learning from those engagements, is that in places where We have a sophisticated set of users like process engineers and operators that run this process, very sophisticated. Data is there, they know how to interact with it, they know how to bring it into the system and work with it as well. And that's really the people that have been driving the value out of these solutions. But then there's a whole other set of people within the industrial enterprise that also wants to do that, but they're sitting under that assumption, and they're sitting on the fence, do I have it or not? But so instead of us playing that hypothetical game, what we ended up doing was actually making use of Gen AI. This is really where I think Gen AI played a critical role in what we have been able to do, is really bring about the industrial enterprise along with us now. And what we've been able to do is get them out of that, hey, I have to go through a data transformation to learn about my data, but actually make use of Gen AI to understand, do I have the data? Do I have enough data? Can it solve the problem? Those questions now can be answered. So we actually took and make use of Gen AI, allowing our customers to come in and answer that question. It's still, you would think a lot of people should know it, but you would be surprised that majority of the people still sit on that fence. And that's really where we brought in Canvas Monet, so that everybody can start to answer that question.
Dave?
No, I like this. I think it's really interesting. I certainly want to go dig more into what you're seeing, what you've built. I will say, kind of the contextualization part that you said early on is super important to me. Whenever I go talk to a person, be it someone who has the tool, has a tool, or someone that is looking to implement AI. It is very much along the lines of their thoughts of contextualization will tell me very early on how the conversation is going to go. Either we're going to be completely aligned, or it's a group who calls who says, hey, I'm looking for artificial intelligence. And I absolutely want to go talk some more about the differences in conversations you're having, because I imagine it's like night and day difference in the last, 6 to 18 months. Of 18 months ago, it's, hey, we have this AI tool, and now people are calling because they're looking for AI. Before we get into that, I do want to ask more kind of the general state of industrial artificial intelligence. Can you give us kind of a broad overview for people who are coming in and might be kind of sitting on the fence of, is it a useful tool? Is it not a useful tool? Can you give us kind of a bit of a broad overview as to how you see the industry and some of the conversations you're having, please?
So I would say, Dave, I would definitely second the thought that, yes, people now come looking for AI. They do. And you have to turn them away at times, because if they're looking for AI, they're not in the right place. But it has helped in certain cases. So the general state of AI, if you ask somebody like me, who's an AI practitioner, and I would say the general state of AI from an industrial perspective is more progressive than it was about a couple of years ago. So people are opening up. There are certainly, and I have some customers very, very conservative, very conservative. These are from chemical, petrochem, oil and gas side, very conservative customers, right? But what I have seen is there's a transition now to learning about AI, to actually sitting down and understanding how it can start to actually impact throughout the organization. You would see business units that are being set up now for AI and machine learning. You see more and more CIOs now having this mandate. And it has also helped, something that we might touch on later, it has also helped to bridge that gap between IT and OT, because both sides are motivated to actually move forward, because IT has also got some huge mandates around AI from an CTO and CIO's organization. So it's also bringing OT along, because OT is the one who's sitting on that data. And so we have really seen that. I would say it's very encouraging. It's very positive. Now, the results of that is still, these are conservative industries. They don't move as fast as other industries like finance and retail. Decision-making is still done in the same ways as it was done 30 years ago in certain places. And so I think if you want to, from an outsider looking in, all positive signs. So these are leading indicators. Are we actually seeing any of the results from it? I think time would only tell, but we're certainly seeing more and more dialogue and conversations. The areas where I see the most impact is about automation and augmentation. This is, I would say, is a very encouraging sign, because this is a place where people get threatened about their jobs, but no more. And that's really because there's a shortage of skilled labor in this environment for the industrial sector, especially in certain industries. There's like a 30 to 40% of their workforce is an aging workforce. If you look at the energy side, that's the case. And so there's a huge lag, and that's where, as they're bringing in the next new generation of folks, it has really become important, because you can't have one person that knows the entire operation, that's been running that unit, kind of trying to train even 4 people, forget about 40 people. So I think there's a huge shift that we're now seeing around automation and augmentation. Also around, if you see certain industries, there is a lack of productivity. Again, that is all related to resources and human part. This is really where it's further driving the need for AI, and the need for AI-based automation and augmentation is to increase productivity. From an industry perspective, if you look at it, like, there are some really encouraging signs where they're saying, it's going to be over $10 trillion of productivity by 2030. And one thing to keep in mind for this industry, it's not about job displacement, specifically for this industry. It's not about job displacement, because we don't have enough people. People are not graduating every day and raising their hand and going, I'm going to go work in industrial and manufacturing sector. No, that's not happening. And so we all having this conversation hopefully encourages certain people, because one part of this is really, it's not about, I think one thing that it's doing, it's actually disrupting this market from a job market perspective, because it's no more about job continuation, it's about skill development now. And this is really where AI plays a huge role. The knowledge base of what you can create, for example, a fermentation process that gets automated through this, or you apply it into a steelmaking process, or you apply it to a refining process where we're implemented today. All of those processes, once you've actually got AI in some way or form running it, either in a full closed loop or not in a closed loop system, now you've got a knowledge base. This is where we have focused on building a repeatable set of configurations for solving these kind of day-to-day problems, because now I'm a new process engineer. I would go in and I would learn, okay, what are the best specs that it's running, right? It's no more from a manual, because the manual doesn't know what ambient conditions are. It doesn't know what's happening in the actual environment. So this is really where AI comes in, and it enables you to create that knowledge base that now you can work with to create the next set of resources that would run that operation.
Absolutely. I think that there are lots of really good thoughts there. I'm going to go jump in with at least one follow-up question and go cut Vlad off, because anyone who's listening on podcast form could not see me like jump out of the screen to go ask this question. I think there were lots of really good points in there. I like talking about the high impact, about the automation and augmentation, and I would completely agree. From my experiences, I see lots of groups not have the workers that they need, and they've got 1 or 2 really highly skilled workers, and they're constantly training people over and over and over again, and they are somewhere along the lines of burnout, and they really don't want to. Everyone knows they need to go capture some of that knowledge to go lighten the load on those highly skilled workers. But up until some of these newer tools, it was an extremely manual process. And I say that coming from a person who has gone through and manually built lots of those tools over the years, is it's just hundreds of hours of work in order to go kind of set up every single stage. So I would completely agree with that. I think that it's interesting. I do want to go back before we talk about some of the challenges and go ask you the question along the lines of, what sort of conversations are you having today, right? We said earlier that a couple of years ago, people weren't calling saying, I would like an artificial intelligence. It was a tool you used. And today people might call and find you because you're Canvas AI, because you're an artificial intelligence tool. are those people, do they have an idea of what they're looking for? Are they saying, hey, AI is all over the place. Our leadership has used ChatGPT 4 times and is now convinced it will go solve all of our problems? What sort of conversations are you having today with people that find you?
Um, there are two kinds of conversations that people, when they come to us, that the conversations that we're having. And by the ways, I think the Chat GPT, I would say, has come up, but it's more come up as, haha, we're using Chat GPT. Yes, IT is now using Chat GPT. But the two kinds of conversations that people come to us for are very specific, related to, I have a particular problem. I saw you have something for it. I'd like to explore more. So I have a problem on my refining side. I have a problem on my energy side. That's why I'm here talking to you about it. So there is a problem that they have, and I would say there's probably a 50-50 split at this point. It wasn't like this before, but more recently, I would say there's a 50-50 split where I have a particular problem and I'm looking for a solution, and I believe this technology that you have built, AI-based solutions, can help me, and that's what they're exploring. The other side of the equation, the people that are coming in for, is really where they're exploring the use of AI. They really believe that this can help in different areas. They're trying to narrow down the scope of that exploration. And why they come to us is because we sit in the industrial sector as the experience provider. So they've really come to us for that. I sometimes feel in that case, you have to do more education at point, and that's really where we ended up creating the academy and enabling people so they can go through a self-learning process on it as well. And then what that allows us further to do is really also help them understand the implications of it. It's not just about, hey, this is what you can use it for. It's how it can change their life as well, right? For an engineer, it's about time. For a manager, it's about looking at either the top line or the bottom line value of it along with their management, right? That's what they're looking for. So I think those are the two ways that people approach. And then I would say there's a lot of that brain suck that happens for people that are just looking to learn, They don't want to do anything with it. So we have to really be smart at times about it. As I said, that's really where we are, given some access into tools and learning for people that just necessarily they don't want to do anything with it. That's the third kind of people. That's really where we had to build a lot of automation to get them to go out and learn on it as well. But that's really what has changed, Dave. Before, it wasn't like this. Nobody came in looking for what can it do for me? How can I use AI? I'm thinking like this. I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about this. They wouldn't. But now I think certainly more and more of those doors have started to open up. Like half of our conversations are around those. We were with somebody this morning that is actually looking for how they can start to completely on their asset side, is really looking at how they can roll out a full program around it, because they're looking to not displace or replace assets, but they're really looking for how we can optimize the entire asset life cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's super interesting, right? Again, I think you've almost led me to a very interesting, I think, like discussion or question that needs to be had, which is, manufacturing has so many different departments and so many different areas, from finance, operations, quality, engineering, R&D, that there's almost vastly different, I think, applications. And I think that at least I'm still in the camp of, I'm looking to apply some of the tools, but I'm also looking to learn what could be possible, right? Because I think it's almost the mentality of, you don't always want to be on the bleeding edge, but you want to understand what's coming next, what could be useful, again, for a specific facility or maybe for a department that you're not necessarily in, but you could suggest to your colleagues, like, hey, you can get this sort of a solution to boost your productivity. So I guess maybe my question would be, do you see a lot of it being more on the process side, such as, again, like augmenting operations and sort of helping drive OEE or the metrics, on the productivity side? Do you see a lot of it maybe on the learning side, right? So I also see the potential of creating better programs for new engineers to understand the process, but it could be also, on the manual side versus just ingesting data from the process. And similarly, financials, right? I think it's very difficult to contextualize some of the data you're collecting into numbers. So I think AI can certainly help with, delivering those numbers. So I'm curious, again, like which areas maybe you see being impacted the most, and kind of what are some of the solutions that people are, how to say it, I guess like I don't want to say trivial, but I guess let's say we all know there's AI in machine vision, right? Like we all know that there's like data processing happening, but maybe some interesting ideas people have not necessarily seen yet or aren't maybe thinking about.
Um, I'll speak from our experience really because we have narrowed down this to a place where is the applicability of AI in day-to-day operations. And that has really come to a place where we see more and more of the process industries that I talked about earlier are data rich, information poor. And then the other thing about that is also because it's an area of continuous improvement. Because in certain other industries, if you go look at it, is you're built by spec. So when you're built by spec and every day you have to actually cater to a certain spec, AI is best at use for repeatability and scalability. Yes, you can do some one-time projects with big consultants that can come in and optimize something that you're doing on one time. But if it's the same fermentation process that you've been running for the 40 years, you're looking to optimize it and it's very dynamic where your existing approaches, first principles based models, your other approaches are getting more and more expensive for you. That's really where, and your resources are also scarce. That's really where AI is playing a role in those kind of industries. That's what we have seen personally. In areas of process optimization, then you look at two kinds of people that are involved. There are the experts, like the engineers that actually know their process and operators that run that process. So they are definitely the one side of this equation that are very much into optimization of the process. But then there is the other side of the organization, people that are planning, people that are doing R&D. Those are the different other kinds of people that also interact with a lot of data. So as we actually worked extensively with this kind, we also recognized there was this audience, this pool of audience that also wanted to engage, not necessarily at the same depth. They might not necessarily have all of those skills. They have some statistical skills, but they don't necessarily have all of the domain expertise that is needed. So we made use of the learnings from here to then make use of the Gen AI capabilities for this kind of an audience that can come in and look at as many aspects, as many flavors of that data that they're working in. Hey, what is this data telling me? What is the most optimized way for me to plan my operations, right? Because I have to plan the inventory. I have to plan, what kind of sales would that generate? Okay, I have to plan what are the different qualities of inventory that I need to order, the kind of products that I need to order. So that's what we ended up doing, Vlad, is kind of looking at this sophisticated audience and learning from that, taking those guardrails, making sure that then this audience also comes in with the use of tools like Monet, which is a Gen AI tool for them to come in and start engage. So it was a very, I would say, thought out process where technology necessarily was not the beginning, but technology became an enabler at the end. But we kind of knew who the audience and the users were on the two ends. Now, I think there's a lot of use of it in other industries as well, of AI and robotics. Like if you look at automotive, a lot of assemblies, almost all robotized, if that's a word, like, all robotics that's being used. And then in certain other industries as well. But I think the particular industries we're talking about, I think something that Dave mentioned earlier, contextualization and domain expertise is just so important. And this is really where we have been able to create that collaboration between AI and human expertise. So for example, if you just take a large language model and threw that, and the large language model today learned 100-degree Fahrenheit is not good for an environment. Well, it's not good for an asset that's running in an outside environment, but you need 100 degrees when you are going through a crude oil refining process. That's the starting point for it. It needs much higher temperature. So if you just threw that and it just knew that 100 degrees is bad, then it's always going to make that as the point of, okay, you can't go beyond it. But the human intelligence and the domain expertise has to be added for each process. And that's kind of how we have built the AI into our system for people to collaborate.
And that's super interesting, right? Because I can tell you again, like firsthand experience in the food and beverage industry. And I think we as maybe engineers or as humans, I think we have a hard time balancing all of the variables that come into a process, whereas, a machine has been optimized for that. So I think me, let's say as an engineer who's auditing a facility, it takes a lot of time and effort for me to understand the process, which is ultimately what is required in order to automate or augment any part of that process, right? So a lot of the bottlenecks in systems integration, or I guess bettering a facility, takes the time in the humans who do the technical work to understand the process side, which they are a lot of times not experts at, right? They need enough knowledge about the process in order to start building the machines. And I think that's a huge time saver. I think if anyone's been through an industrial integration process, truly understands what that takes. Next, I guess, like, if I want to step back a little bit, right? So maybe what kind of challenges do you encounter during these integrations or even conversations, right? I think we talked a little bit on the data side. I think that one mistake manufacturers or end users certainly make is assuming that they have, the right data, or they even have data in general that is able to be ingested. Any other maybe gotchas or maybe learning points as you have these conversations of what could be some common pitfalls, and maybe what are some of the ways to overcome them as well?
Oh, that could be a whole other podcast on that topic, but I'll try and see how I can summarize it the best. Is I think outside of data challenge, which is, as I said, could be just such a long topic to talk about. I think I would start from a place of the first barrier that I would say is the most common is change management. Okay, so what if you can actually, we can tell you, or you're looking to implement a system, and through the process you've been able to bring in, let's say it's a, you have a bunch of code generation units, and you're looking to optimize your energy process, and you've been able to do that. Okay, now when you want to implement it, and you go into your operation and you figure out, well, I need to go through a whole process with my IT side, and then I have to go through a whole process and bring in the people that implemented the control system, because I want to actually fully integrate it so that I can build a full closed loop system. It is those kind of barriers. I would always say is one thing that I now say is that's a first question to be asked is, okay, when we get to that state, how does this get operationalized? Because that I have seen has been one of the biggest barriers that keeps people away from operationalizing such things. This is where back in the day when people used to say it's all a pilot purgatory, that is very true still in certain cases, because people haven't figured out how they operationalize. Outside of that, I think it's really a lot still about cloud versus non-cloud, and then there's always that debate that happens, even though we as a business provider of a SaaS solution, we have overcome, because we've figured out what the best combinations is for different kinds of people that are going to do either cloud-based or hybrid. But I think that's another one of the key learnings that comes, because as you go to implement, you might have the best product, but if the OT and the IT side hasn't yet resolved how they're going to bring it into their environment, that's a big barrier, another big barrier. And that's really where I always say is you have to go in and make sure you have checked those boxes up front, because you could have built the whole thing and then it's not going anywhere. I think the third is making sure that you are basically upskilling. You're providing value to the user of it at the end of the day. Because if it takes more time for the user, learning is fine, and make sure that the user is aware of it. But if it takes time, or the same amount of time or more for the user, you can't add another tool to that individual who's already 130% subscribed. You cannot, or oversubscribed, you cannot add another tool to them. So make sure that you find ways of how, if it's about an output, how does that output go into a screen they're used to, or into a system that they're already using? That kind of a compliance would just help, because then it reduces that barrier to entry. I think there's still some fears about AI, and more people are overcoming, but we still see that off and on. I think that still comes up. So those are some of the things I would say is outside of the traditional things, is just things to keep in mind when you go about implementing, or actually go beyond the trial phase into implementing any of these solutions.
I think, look, there's many directions we can go on that. As you said, probably a whole, podcast on its own. Dave, what are maybe some of your thoughts? Because I have multiple questions, but what do you think?
Absolutely. No. So I think, Humera, I think you had a really good point about change management. I feel like lots of times we talk about tools and people think a tool is going to solve their process just magically overnight. And I feel like those groups always struggle and or fail. Change management is certainly not something talked about enough when we talk about adopting new tools or adopting kind of anything that goes along with it. I want to talk, you brought up upskilling, and I want to talk specifically to the engineers and the operators and the people actually making sure that the manufacturing industrial processes continue to work. I would imagine that there's lots of unknown and they are worried, right? They're worried that their jobs are going to go away or that they're going to pay less or that, a la Terminator, the machines are going to take over. I always tell them no, that we'll probably need them more than ever. But how do you have those conversations? Are those conversations coming up at the operator level? Are they coming up at the executive level? What are you experiencing?
I'll probably start. I told myself before coming in I would try to do less stories, but I would have to tell you stories around this one. Because when we were working with some of the customers, there are two stories that come to my mind. One was really about an engineer, and this was about an energy process, and they had some very huge energy assets, and the management was very interested in how to automate the process because it was one engineer managing multiple assets and a junior guy. And the management brought us in to do that. The next thing we know, a very successful solution for that we were ready to implement, and engineer vetoes us out of the island and we couldn't do it. And that was just a pure threat to my job. It's not about optimizing. That's what management was trying to do. But because they were disconnected, and the management the people that were actually sponsoring never told the engineer that. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of a disconnect you would see, and you're out, really. So forget change management, nothing's going to happen there. Mm-hmm. The other case, which is I'll share, is about then the management side, which was totally disconnected. And this was really a very senior management side, which is totally disconnected of how AI is helping them automate a certain process. So mm-hmm. as AI is helping them automate a certain process where they had a lot of manual intervention because of the quality, they had manual inspection of the quality of their assets. And that manual inspection was costing them a lot. So the plant engineer lead there decides that they want to implement a technology. They did. And then the unit head finds out and they go, well, they're not the experts in that field, but why would AI be better than us? And so anyways, that's another one of the cases where it couldn't get operationalized because forget change management, they're not aligned. Management and the people were not aligned. So I think this is what we have learned. It's very, very important. Everybody communicates and everybody's aligned. You have to really connect the dots on that alignment. Otherwise, what happens is, in certain cases, when you're working with the engineers, they want to solve the hardest problem because they think AI is magic. And I can't tell you how many times that has happened. They want to start with the most complex. I've not been able to do it for 20 years. I think AI can do it. Well, no, AI can't do it. That's not the place to start and build confidence, okay? Yes, you can get there. But so those are the kind of things that, knowing that we have been through it, that now we would look out for, and I would advise anybody else to look out for as well, is alignment between all parties is very important. And alignment on the business case is very important. Because in certain cases, when you're implementing this, they're like, oh, we don't know how to measure the ROI on this. Oh, why are we doing this again? And so it's very important to understand that, what are those ways to measure? Because otherwise it can get all bundled into other things. That's very important. And then being able to reduce the number of barriers. That's what I was saying earlier about as well. The more barriers you're creating, oh, no, it's only going to reside in this environment and in this case, and that's all. It creates barriers. So you have to be flexible enough to remove those barriers. And that's really what it is. I think at the end of the day, I work with certain kinds of philosophy, which is simplicity. It should be simple enough so that everybody can use it. And that's really where we have taken Canvas sophisticated users. With Monet, it's all kinds of different users that come in. And I'm open for feedback. Tell me if it doesn't work for you. How can we make it work for you, right? And simplicity, it's about scalability. It's not about one time solve the most common, the most complex problem because I've not been able to solve it for 20 years. No, it should be scalable. If you can solve it in one place, how can you take it to the next 18 plants that you can solve it, right? That's what it should be. And I think the third is the confidence. It builds confidence with the user base. It builds confidence with your customer that they can do it. Because if there's no alignment between the different people, they would never build that confidence. You're not going anywhere with it.
I guess as a very brief follow-up, any interesting like small use cases that you've seen that maybe demonstrate as the first step of what could be done, right? Because I think, again, we've talked about entire processes that could probably take a while to map, and there's a lot of complexity, but what are some of the early steps that a company that is perhaps like not sold but is looking maybe to put in a little bit of money into R&D and just seeing a proof of concept that would sell them on the rest of the facility? Any maybe low-hanging fruit that you see?
Very good question, Vlad. I think there's a few low-hanging fruit that I would ask everybody to look at. One is starting from a place where you believe that you have the data and you can solve the problem. Not necessarily a place from where, hey, I am coming from the most complex place. But so, for example, in certain cases, energy management, energy usage, really there is always, in most cases, we would see data. We have seen that customers have that data. They have the data related to ambient conditions that impact it. They have the data related to, what their assets, how their assets are performing. They bring in that data and they get started from that point. So usually we see energy management as one area where people come in and get started. The second area really has been also, although it's process, but they bring in the asset data to see like how their assets are performing in terms of running that. So a lot of times it's just simple things like, can I detect anomalies well enough in time during X process to know what's going on, and I can prevent that from happening? So simple things like anomaly detection that they would do. It's not even going as far as full predictive maintenance that they have gone forward with. And I think more recently is we have seen more and more people come in as we started to give access into Monet for this group of people, is where people are coming in and just interacting to learn about their data and learning about what's going on through the data. So one example was one of the customers that came in, and they just brought their data. They were looking at where their leaks were happening. Can the data define where the leaks were happening? Without them implementing any systems, can I look in through that? And they were able to do that. And then these kind of simple things are really a place to get started. I think my advice would be for anybody looking at it is don't start from a place of complexity, start from a place of simplicity and build that confidence. Once you have built that confidence, things do get easy. And by the way, not everything is solvable by AI. It's not a magic pill you can just give it and it solves all your problems. No, it doesn't. So, you have to really understand that AI works with your data, with your domain knowledge, and with the need for where you're trying to apply it is really where sometimes it's simple machine learning things. You can apply regression-based models as well, and they would work because your problem is very simple. But look at it this way is, you need to apply it to places where you feel there is a need because humans are spending too much time. If you're spending 40% of your time working with your spreadsheets, totally go for AI. That's really where it would help you.
Let me ask you another follow-up before I Dave jump back in. So, the second point, which I think is close to at least to my heart, which is the entire IT/OT debate, right? And I know that many of our listeners come from, I want to say, like both sides of the coin, but I've certainly sat in many meetings on the OT side, sort of arguing or trying to get IT to develop an architecture that would be, how to say it, more open to data being flown, either it's to the cloud or even like a local server. So I'm curious, maybe how do you have those conversations and perhaps sell a group that is not directly, let's call it, looking at that data all the time? And also, are there even maybe like workarounds where as OT we can deploy something within, let's say, our network and not even care about those conversations? So I'm curious, how do you navigate that landscape?
Um, OT and IT is not always an easy question to answer. Because if I told you that, oh, it's all a rosy story, I won't, it won't be fair, because it's not always that way. I think there's an interesting aspect to it, which is, yes, there are ways for OT to try out certain things without the point of, without having IT in it. That's the experimentation part, right? You have certain places where you want to actually look at, hey, how is my yield? How can I optimize this yield? How can I predict some of my quality issues in my crude oil unit earlier on? How can I, predict that I don't have to run all of these 3 cogen assets at the same level? How can I actually run one of them and, still be able to meet the needs? So wherever you have that, experimentation is always possible without the engagement from IT perspective. So I would say is that helps you build a business case. I'm giving you like the path to it, the formula for it really. So one way is doing that, where you build the business case. Once you have a business case, IT is all for it, really, because they also have to prioritize in their list of, 5,000 things where this sits, because the entire organization is coming to them. So I think once you have a business case, then we have seen IT prioritizing it. But if you go where, it's for experimentation's sake and you're trying to get this prioritized, that becomes a very difficult, that's a challenging place to start with. The other thing is also where, we have partners, and where we work with partners really is they have provided an IT environment which is compliant and has met all of the needs. And the same environment is where you can bring in your OT data as well. And once you can do that, that's another way where IT will not necessarily engage. So as more progressive customers that we have seen that are moving into certain data lakes, that are moving into certain IT compliant systems, that's really where we also see that it removes that barrier towards IT. I think those are the more traditional, or maybe non-traditional, those are the ways, Vlad, that we have seen people getting engaged. In all other cases, you really have to go through a process unless OT walks you through the back door and you're going in. You would have to go through IT in order to operationalize anything.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and jump in to make sure that I can get at least one more question or comment in here. I think all of those are really good. I think the IT OT debate is probably a debate that has raged probably as much, if not more than anything else over the last 4 years on Manufacturing Hub. And I think it very much boils down to what you were saying, with the fact that if you want to go be successful and build enterprise solutions, if you want to go roll out site-wide or across an enterprise, you very much need IT on your team. I feel like there are some people, guests, folks in the comments, maybe Vlad sometimes, who is like, no, I really hate IT. I just want to go kind of build the solution. They are sometimes detrimental. I will say here what I've said a bunch of times in the past is probably about 50% of the work that I do is with IT teams, be it MES and other data analytics kind of embedded on IT, which I'm seeing more and more on the enterprise side now. Or if I'm coming in and I'm working with the IT side, because I feel like we are getting very close to everyone is aligned with, we know at the end of the day, we have to make cases or we have to make barrels or whatever our outcome is. Generally, everyone agrees that we need to go make this. I think that the IT and the OT teams, as long as they're aligned, there is a middle ground, right? It may make everyone slightly uncomfortable. It certainly won't be the easiest way for either of the teams to allow these tools and these projects to happen. But I think at the end of the day, most groups are run by fairly reasonable folks who know that we need to go find ways to leverage these tools if we want to be successful into the future.
I'd agree. I completely agree with you, Dave.
Absolutely. I do want to say let Vlad ask a couple more questions, but before we're done here today. But first, I just want to say we've had a ton of comments in the chat today. We actually haven't had any questions. So if there are questions for Humera, if there are questions for Vlad or myself or about Canvas AI or any of these tools that we're talking about, please feel free to go drop the questions and all of those things in the comments, and we will either answer them or we will be sure to go tag the appropriate person to make sure that they can go answer them. If you guys have missed the beginning of that and are new to the show, we actually have a number of folks who are new to well, I don't recognize their names in the comments all across a bunch of platforms. So having said that, you guys go drop some stuff in the comments. Vlad, what's the last series of conversations you want to take us down today?
I want to ask you, Humera, about education, right? So you've mentioned that you guys have built out sort of an academy platform, and I've certainly struggled maybe to have conversations with end users where they would ask me as to what is possible or maybe what opportunities there are. So how do we, I guess, as an industry, and how are you guys maybe educating I don't want to say the public, but I guess the end users of these types of solutions as to what is possible, and how can we as an industry get better at educating what the opportunities are?
Yes, I would say, Vlad, it's actually, you would be surprised at the amount of knowledge information these days that is out there and available for free. It's actually one thing that Gen AI has done in the past 2 years is there is so much information available. You just still have to go seek it. And I think that's the challenge. Nobody has enough time in our industry specifically. When you look at the industrial sector, the domain experts, the SMEs, anybody that we work with doesn't have enough time. And this is really where we saw the need for an academy for our users, is because they can do it at their own time. They can come in and learn. And it's not necessarily just about the use of the tool, it's about the use of AI, how they can make use of it in their operations, how they can make use of it in their day-to-day lives as well. And so that's what we have done, but it's all related back to optimizing their processes and optimizing their operations. But I think in general, if you look at, there is a lot of knowledge and information available out there now. It just, I think there's a big opportunity for somebody to go and actually make it specific and create some sort of a tool for different kinds of people in the industrial sector, right? Because you would find there's no lack of information for content creators, for marketers, for sales automation purposes, but you don't see that same level of knowledge and information being packaged for our users. Like, who's doing that for operators, different kind of operators? Who's doing that for different kind of process engineers? Who's doing that for maintenance guys? No, they still have to go through those old manuals and books to be able to learn. So I think that still hasn't been solved. Not that it's not solvable. I think that's definitely an opportunity. But why we had to do it was because so that our users can do it for themselves at their own time, at their own pace. And then it also encourages from one user to the other, right? Like, if one of the engineers that's using the tool has gotten used to it, then they can also get others to learn about it without them trying to spend their time. So I think that's the kind of use that I see for it. But I just don't think there is enough for our market out there. And I think there's a need more of these kind of dialogues. We want more people to do, we want more information. And then these kind of dialogue that, okay, we're talking about many things today because of the time constraints, and we have a varying audience as well, but then making it more maybe around certain areas as well. Those kind of dialogues, I'm sure, would definitely help, because then they can listen to that podcast, they can listen to that information that could help them get better at their job.
And I think that definitely makes sense, right? I see people, I think there's not a lack of information, as you said. It's more people get overwhelmed by maybe trying to get to a too complex of a solution, as you mentioned earlier, where, they start to realize, well, now I need to get IT involved. I need to now, get the data we've not been collecting into a database or data lake. And so they start to kind of create more problems than maybe the proof of concept project that can be used as a business case to then maybe get access to more funds and then accelerate sort of the growth. So I certainly agree. I think that there's a lot of, I want to say, general or broad conversations. And again, I think the software industry is just so much larger that they drive a lot of that type of content. And we, as the industrial side maybe don't get as much focused learnings, but I think it's definitely great that you guys have put this together. I'll take a look at it in depth myself, because I'm certainly, like I said, I'm still in the camp where I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to understand the different opportunities in order to better convey that to the end users as to what is possible. So certainly appreciate the resource.
Absolutely. And let me ask a follow-up on that, and then we've got a question talking about the future of AI in the chat. But talking about the education, whose responsibility should that be in the future? Should OEMs should groups like Canvas be building a bunch of AI specific content to help upskill people? Should it be a responsibility of the OEMs if they or the end users, excuse me, if they are going to go through the process of going and implementing a bunch of this technology? Should we have AI courses like we have other skills and safeties courses? Where do you see that the content coming from in the coming years?
So my simple answer to that would be, Dave, all of the above.
Okay.
But that there's always a but there, right? Because I
Mhm.
think the way where AI is going,
Mhm.
education is becoming very AI oriented as well. So it's no more just going to be, just one place, you go to this academy and that's all there is.
Mhm.
A lot of this content is going to be fed through Gen AI, and it's going to be actually then creating that content that's going to be accessible for all different kind of users and all different kind of parties. So today, for example, it's targeting, as I said earlier, it's how you can create videos, how you can do X, how you can do Y. But eventually where this is going, in my opinion, is where how you can run a pulp and paper process. It might not have the entire recipe for it, but it's going to break down from the upstream all the way into downstream.
Mhm.
Is what kind of specs. So instead of going through manuals, or instead of going through that learning from experience, you actually would be able to use Gen AI. And I think
Mhm.
somebody out there is already probably working on these things, which is really feeding Gen AI all of those manuals, and then getting the domain expertise added on top of it, so that that actually becomes that learning place. I think that's where the industry is going. Are we there today? No, we're not. Nobody is actually looking at this industry that way, but that's really
Mhm.
where education is going.
I think that's interesting. So I've looked at and worked on applications where we fed very specific manuals for lines for facilities into these tools to allow them to go kind of answer some of those questions, which is so much better, as I've told Vlad, than having to for Dave to go manually figure out the answer to the top 10 or 20 downtime questions and then manually type it in to these tools in the past. So for me, I like that. I had not considered the concept of kind of giving one system everything and then in theory allowing it to be fed. It's an interesting concept. I feel like that's hours of conversation.
I
Right
would
in
say,
there though.
Dave, I would add though, like what has also helped from a Gen AI perspective. So when I work with Monet and I'm putting some kind of data in it, and when it automatically gives me the second set of prompts that I need to ask, and I don't have to think about it, and I'm already learning about my data from it, that's what I like already, right? Like it's that
Absolutely.
where I don't have to put in extra effort. I always like that.
Absolutely, I agree with that. So we do have one very forward-looking question from LinkedIn that I want to make sure to bring in from Afshin. Yeah, asking, is there any point that you see in the horizon for a more kind of decision-making focused levels of artificial intelligence? So we talked about some of the kind of early process. I think he's asking, do you see it making some of the kind of much higher level questions and being able to answer those questions into the future? And perhaps if yes, when would you imagine that to happen?
I'm assuming this question has two angles to it. One is how far out can you
Yes.
look at the data and be able to predict that? And then the other is, okay, how sophisticated can AI get so that, it can start to look at things more upstream before getting to the downstream, like how much higher up can I look at it? So if I look at it in those two, I think from a time perspective, every process is different. In certain well collapse case, we have seen where our predictions go from hours to days to weeks. And that's really what it has to look at, predicting it at a certain time. Because if you can't do it at a certain time, you've lost that window of opportunity. So to me, it's a process by process thing. Because if you sometimes go way higher, then you have no way of controlling it. So keep in mind, it's precision. It's the precision of the decision making that has to take charge in that case. In the other case of going higher up the chain to be able to make decisions, I would say it again has to be looked at use case by use case. Because let's say if it all starts with the quality of the wood that's being put in, that's going to impact the output of the paper that's going to come out, or the quality of the crude oil that's being put in, that's going to depend on the output of the level of octane that you're going to produce, all the different mixings that you're going to do. Yes, it makes sense, right? Even in cases of steel making, it depends on the kind of coke that's coming in, that's going to go through the furnace for you to different grades of coke or quality of coke. So I think it all depends. In those kind of processes, yes, the more upstream you can go and the more higher level you can go where you can start to work it, which means that now you're fully automated that entire process. That's the holy grail of what we want our customers to get to. And some of them are actually moving towards it, but not everybody. But when we're here a few years from now, that's really what would happen. So I think that's a great question, because that's really impactful. Now you have completely fully automated the process, and now you can sit back and look at the measures, the KPIs, to know exactly what kind of output you're going to have.
Yeah, and I would say, if I can add, I think it's a very difficult question to answer reliably, right? Because you can take this to an extreme where you're even pulling in data from, your supply chain and how the product is selling, how long it's sitting on shelves, and it's almost, you could say that the possibilities are technically endless, because then you could start predicting, which product you should be making on which line based on how performant they are. So and I think it's difficult to provide a perspective, I would say, at this stage. But I think, Mary, you certainly hit it on the head on that side. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm personally, very curious, optimistic, and excited to see what different companies come up with. But I think there's going to be, how to say it, a lot of differences in variability across industries. But yes, super interesting. Dave?
Absolutely. No, this has been great. And I feel like that question set us up to go ask the question that I really enjoy asking all of our guests, is very much predict the future. So Humera, what do you think that the future of artificial intelligence in industrial and or manufacturing looks like in the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think part of that was answered in the last question. I'll give you two views of mine, one related to industrial, just one related to AI. Because they're two different universes. In the world of industrial, where I see AI being implemented is it will not even be part of the conversation anymore as I'm implementing AI. AI would just be part of how you roll out any of those technologies today, which is, how nobody really thinks about why they need any kind of data lakes or their historians or why they implemented PLCs. It's in my view, over the next few years, that's how it would become. It's just being implemented as part of most of their ongoing processes and any kind of implementations that they're doing. But in this industry, the challenge is they're still sitting on legacy assets and legacy processes. So the opportunity is huge. It's just not going to happen in the next couple of years. It's actually a cycle that's going to go through, this industry is going to go through the next decade in order to see that happen. And that's one thing that I think the urgency in my mind is it needs to happen faster, because unlike other industrial revolutions, in this case, what we're going through, I don't know, it's a 5 or the 6, whatever revolution this would be, is really whatever number somebody wants to assign to it. It is very important because we're going through a shift of resources that used to manage this process. We're going through a shift in technology. So much is changing, and this industry is so volatile. Like, market conditions are changing, competitive pressures are much higher. All of that So I feel that even though I'm saying that that's going to happen, is where this would become part of, just like how people have been incorporating PLCs in their environment, like that's what it becomes. It's part of their just infrastructure that they're implementing. And it's become where the industry has gotten is, where it's actually now part of all parts of continuous improvements. That's what AI has become part of for them. But I think we're just not moving at a pace fast enough for that.
Interesting.
In general, AI, I have a theory about AI where it's going. And I think just for this audience, I would say it's really where we're moving with AI, and it's moving pretty fast, is we will probably get to a part of AI-based conscious network where people can contain their thoughts and emotions and experiences and knowledge. And if we could do that, that's really going to be great for the industrial world. Because I could be sitting in the plant in Spain and you could be sitting in the plant in Nepal. And if I can share that kind of my emotion that I went through in terms of the change that I went through when I was optimizing my plant, and I can share with you the experience and the knowledge of it, that's where I think it's that AI-based conscious network. And that would really start to foster the kind of collaboration that we're looking for.
That is interesting. I probably have like 20 minutes of just mind dump based upon that, but I'm going to do that after the show and not force the listeners to listen to that. As I'm thinking about that, we always like to ask for some career advice. So if we have an early or mid-stage career person who is looking at getting more into artificial intelligence, what is the best kind of career advice you have for them?
I touched on it earlier in the conversation when I said it's no more about job creation. It's really about skill development. And my advice to anybody now getting into this kind of jobs is really focus on developing skills. And those skills means not just, hey, I have the knowledge for this process. It's about the knowledge related to the new set of technologies, tools, and the software skills as well for you to be able to be at the top of your game, really. So it's no more about, going from one job to another. I'm going to be in this job and then I'm going to switch and I'll be the same reliability engineer from here to here to here to here. No, it's about developing a core skill set. And that skill set could be about, about certain kinds of technologies. That skill set is also beyond that as well, where you've been able to actually acquire a different set of skill set and different kind of knowledge, because now you can look at optimizing an entire operation instead of just operating one line that you have learned how to do. So I think to me, it's all about skills development. Today it's AI, tomorrow it's going to be quantum, then it's going to be something else. Just have that ability and flexibility where you can go out and develop more and more skills, because that's what people would be actually looking at evaluating you for. It's no more about, just like how it's no more about where you graduated from, where you've come from. It's really about now the core skill sets that you're bringing. If you look at now the world of virtual content creators, we don't know who's coming from where. It's the skill set that they're learning, the new set of tools that they're able to take to market and they're able to go to market with, which differentiates them. I think that's the same thing that we need to do on our side.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with that. I think that is a fantastic answer. Thank you so much for that. Next question is, if people enjoyed this, want to know more about what you're reading and listening to, do you have a book and or content recommendation for us today?
I would tell you what my favorite book is. I'm not sure if I would recommend that. But yes, okay. So from a content perspective, my usual is when I'm running, I would listen to podcasts, and I'm a big fan of Diary of CEO. I love listening to just something different because of not necessarily everything related to work. Books, I do enjoy science fiction, I would say, outside of business books. My favorite has been it's a Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy. It's a science fiction, or Lord of the Rings. Like, that's what I like. So if you're into that kind of thing, then yes, go for it. Read it or watch it.
Absolutely. I feel like a sci-fi recommendation for an artificial intelligence conversation is probably the most perfect recommendation you could give for us. So thank you so much for that. And last question, Humera, is how can our guests help? Who should reach out? Are you guys looking for customers? Are you guys looking to hire? How can our guests help you in what you're building at Canvas AI?
I would say my marketing team would not like it if I didn't say this, and I'll get fired because they won't like it. Is you should all go sign up for Monet because we're super excited about the kind of response we've gotten, and we've just made it publicly available. So I would say everybody should go because you all need to be AI savvy, AI learned, AI skilled. So that's a place. And get in touch with us. Send us a note at info@canvas.ai, or send me an email at info@canvas.io. Connect with me on LinkedIn. We're very responsive. So if you have a need for any AI solutions in your operations, we're here to talk to you.
Fantastic. Everyone, thank you for being here. Humera, thank you for this awesome conversation that we've had. I hope it is the first of many that we get to bring you back on, continuing to go talk about artificial intelligence and what that means in like 1,000 different verticals that we barely got our toes dipped in at the moment. If you guys have made it this far and you're not connected to Humera, if you're not following Canvas.ai, please go ahead and do that. If you guys are listening in show notes, we'll go have that information there as we always have there magically. And when I say magically, I mean it's 100% manual on Vlad. So thank you for doing that, Vlad. Speaking of Vlad, if you guys aren't connected with Vlad and myself or following Manufacturing Hub, please go ahead and do that. If you guys have made it this far on YouTube, we've got a few new YouTube watchers, one new watcher on Facebook, and a number of new folks on LinkedIn today. So make sure you've liked and subscribed and done all of those things. If you made it this far on podcast format, give us the thumbs up, rate us 5 stars, hit the follow button, do the auto download, which is what I do for all of my favorite podcasts. Or you guys just want to help us get some more listens, go ahead and hit that auto download button, and go ahead and like and share and all of those things. Everyone, thank you for being with us. We will be here live next Tuesday, not Wednesday,